Hello, my name is Tessa McBurney, and I'm the Atlantic Bat Conservation Project Technician with the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative Atlantic Region. And today we're going to discuss how to create metadata for mobile transect acoustic files. So to start, I'm just going to show you how to take the SD card from the detector and transfer the data to your computer. So I've already taken the SD cards out of the detectors. So when I did this as a precautionary measure, I first shut the detector off by switching the black switch on the top right from INT, like internal, to EXT or external. So I flipped the switch on it before I took the SD card out. You can also remove the batteries at this time if the detector is not going to be used again in the near future. And all of the data are recorded on the SD card. So you can just remove the SD cards from the SD slots in the detector. So I removed those SD cards already, and I put the SD card into the SD slot in my computer. So that's the step I'm at now. So you can see here, SDHC, I have an SD card in my SD card slot. So I should be able to just click on that, and now I can see the data that's on that SD card. So I'm going to be able to copy that data and transfer it onto my computer. But before we do that, we're going to set up the folders that we want the data to be stored in. So I'm going to do that now. So just bear with me as I go through my computer files here so I can store it where I want to store it. We already have any bad data, over 5 years worth here. So the data I'm uploading now is from 2020. So I need to create a new folder, just an overarching folder. So for this, you can put your organization and NABAT and the year. Because I have multiple years worth of data, the folder I have above this has our organization on it, CWHC, NABAT data, and then I break it down by year, so you can do that if you want to. But this is the important part here. You're going to want to follow these steps exactly to ensure you have the correct folder. So I'm going to create 2 new folders, one for the raw data and one for the process data. Okay. And let's go into the raw data folder. So here I'm going to create a folder for my stationary surveys. And at this site, we also have conducted a mobile or multiple mobile transects. So I'm also now going to create a mobile transect folder. So in here, our stationary survey has 4 different sites. So I'm going to create a folder for each site. So we already have names for our sites just based on habitat and location. So you can choose whatever names you want for your 4 sites, or you could even have just site 1, site 2, site 3, site 4, but make sure that it's easy to know which site is which. That's why I prefer to use a descriptive term, because just looking at it, I know exactly what site it is without having to try to remember, oh, which is site 1. So those are our 4 sites. And then in the mobile transect folder, I'll just do this now, but you create a folder per mobile transect survey. And you can use the date if you want to break it down that way, or just mobile transect 1 or 2, whatever's easiest. We actually only did 1 transect this year on July, or last year, I guess. So I'll just I'll name it the folder, just the name with the date. So we just have 1. So that's your raw data. And now we want to make the same folders in our process data folder. So you can actually just copy these. It's the simplest way to do it. And in process data, you will paste those folders. So make sure they're not cut, they're copied, so you still have them in both raw and process data. So let's just check. So for our stationary survey, remember we had 4 sites. So those are all still in there. And then mobile transect, we had July 10th. Perfect. So we're still in our process data folder. So now we actually want to create 2 more folders within process data. And this will be for our metadata. So we want one for our stationary surveys. I usually just call it stationary survey metadata. And we also need a metadata folder for our mobile transect. So we should have 4 folders here within process data, and only the 2 within raw data, because we won't be creating metadata for the raw data files. Okay, so that's what it looks like. In our guide, there is a breakdown that you can follow if that was a little too fast. So just use that as a reference. Okay, so now we can copy our data over. So I'm going to go back to my SD card data. So the SD card I have in here is from our school site. So I'm just going to copy all of that data from the SD card. And I'm going to go back to our 2020 folder, and it's our raw data because we're just pulling it off the detector. It's a stationary survey site, and I said that it was the school site, so I'm just going to paste that data right there in our school folder. Okay, so now you would do this for all 4 of your sites. I can quickly do that now. I will tell you that once you have copied the data to your computer and you make sure that it's saved and backed up, and that you can't lose the data in any way, when you remove the SD card from your computer, so let's do that now, you'll want to make sure that you're removing it safely. So eject your SD card. Great. So when you remove it from the computer, you can put it back in the detector, and there will be an option on the detector to reformat the SD card, and that will remove all of the data and make sure that the card is reformatted to be used again. So you can find instructions on how to do that in our guide. So I'll quickly put in our other SD cards. And now all of your stationary data should be in the raw data file. So let's just check. Raw data, stationary survey. We have our farm data, forest trail data, golf course data, and our school data. And the detector is also just providing a summary text file as well, with some information, so you can look through that if you're interested. So now you can see we also have our mobile Transect data removed from the SD card, and it is now stored in our subfolder under raw data. So again, we created a file folder for the date of the survey, and you can see all of the raw data is there. So now we're able to start processing that data. So the first thing you need to do before you can start processing your raw data is you need to download 2 metadata forms for Kaleidoscope. And you can find those on this website. So you can see that here. The website is also, there's a link for the website in our guide, so you can use our guide to get to this page as well. So for the mobile transects, you need to download this file, NABAT metadata form Kaleidoscope mobile. And you also need to download the NABAT mobile meta output only K-Pro. So I already have both of these files saved on my computer, but you will need to download both of those and then save them somewhere that you'll be able to find them later. The next step before we can even begin processing our files is to create a species list on your NABAT account. So if you haven't done that yet, I can quickly show you how to do that. So you're going to go again to nabatmonitoring.org. Okay, and you're going to click on the orange Partner Portal button in the top right. And now you're going to click on the Login, Request an Account button, again at the top right. And you're going to scroll down to Other Science-Based Accounts and then log into your NABAT account. Click on the blue Login with Science-Based button. Great. So now you're logged into your account. So you're going to go to your projects page. And then you're going to select the project that you will be creating your species list for. So now you will be clicking on the Species List tab, which you can see here. Great. And you can see I already have 2 species lists created with this project, but I'll create another one just to show you how to do that. So you're going to click on the green Edit button in the top right. So your Manage Classifiers button. And then if you want to create a new species list, you'll click on the gray Add button. So first you have to give your species list a name, and maybe you want to give it a name depending on the area where you're monitoring or based on something else. I'll just specify based on our location of our grit cell. Okay, so you fill that in, and then you also need to fill in a description. So they also give you an example, so you can just copy that if you want. And then you're going to select your species to include under the definition column. So if you click on the drop down, you can select your species. So depending on the area where you're monitoring, you'll want to include different species, but I'm just going to click or select all of the options for all of Atlantic Canada. So you will just scroll down to the species you want and then just select the box next to that species, like EPFU. So there, we do have a list of all of these species in our guide. So if you're not sure what the 4-letter abbreviation or code stands for, that is described further in our guide. So we want EPFU, so big brown bats, Labo, Lassie, Pesu. We wanted Lano, but I think I missed it. So scroll back up. It's in alphabetical order, or close to alphabetical order. We want Mysi and Milu as well. So those are the 7 species found in Atlantic Canada, but you may also want to include some of your species groups. That's up to you. So a few that you might use are here. Noise, no ID, Mayo. Great, so I think that's all of the possible species groups you'd want to include. Okay, so if you want to remove a species from the list, you should just be able to select the check mark next to that species name, and that will remove that species. Alternatively, you can click on the X next to the species name in one of the blue boxes, and that will remove that species from your list. And you can also use the search bar to search. If you know the species code, you can just type it in the search bar, and it should bring you to that species. So once you're satisfied with your list, you can click on the green Save button in the top right, and that will save your species list. Alternatively, if you want to delete your species list for some reason, you can click on the red X under the trash can button next to that list, and that will delete that species list. Okay, now that you've done that, we're ready to actually start processing the files in Kaleidoscope. Okay, so you're going to go to your desktop and you're going to select the Kaleidoscope icon on your desktop to open the Kaleidoscope software. So this opens the Kaleidoscope converter window. And the first thing you'll want to make sure is that you are on BAT analysis mode. So select that from the drop down here if it is not already selected, because we're going to be processing BAT files ideally. Okay, so just a note that you need to have Kaleidoscope version 5 or later, or a more recent version of software for these instructions to work. So to find your software version, you can go to Help, About, and that opens this little window, and you can see your version should be right here at the top. So you can see my version is 5.3.9. So I have version 5 or later, so I should be good. And then click on OK in the bottom when you're done. Okay, so first we need to select our input folder. So you're going to click on Browse. Okay, and you're going to go to your NABAT folder for this year, and you're going to go to the raw data folder that you created earlier. And we're doing our mobile transect, or we're processing the mobile transect data now. So open your mobile transect folder, and the date of the folder of the survey that you're going to be processing first. If you have more than one folder, I only have one. And then select that folder. For output, you're going to select the matching folder in your processed data folder. So again, we're going to go to the NABAT for that year, process data. We want our mobile Transect folder, and the date, the matching date for the survey we're processing now, and select that folder. Great. So now we need to fill out the appropriate NABAT project form. So in this drop down here, likely you have it, if you haven't used Kaleidoscope before, you may have it on default project form. So you're going to need to add or replace a project form. And you're going to need to find those files that you downloaded in an earlier step from the NABAT website. So it's important to remember where you save them on your computer. I save them here, so I can open, I'm going to open the Kaleidoscope mobile form. Mine does say BC, my form is a little bit different, but you will open your Kaleidoscope mobile.xml form, and you can click open. I'm going to click cancel because I already have the form saved, but you will click open. And then if it doesn't automatically populate in this dropdown, you're going to select that form from the list. Okay, so Kaleidoscope mobile. Okay, once you do that, the project form opens. So now we have to start populating those fields. Okay. So if you actually hover over the field, it will give you information on how to fill that field out. So that can be really helpful as well. You will have to use the exact same format that it describes for you for it to work properly. And again, those are detailed in our guide. Okay, so for the grid cell ID, if you used a GPS during your mobile transect, you will type in your grid cell ID. If you did not use a GPS during your survey, you will leave the grid cell ID blank. And that is so we can actually draw our survey, our transect later using a special tool on the NABAT website. So we did use a GPS with our survey, but I want to be able to show you how to use that tool. So I'm going to actually leave that field blank for now. For location name, you can put route if you want, or another descriptor for your transect, especially if you perform more than one transect at a site, you'll want to give a descriptive name so that you know that which transect these data are for. Okay, then you need your survey start time. So you have to make sure, again, that you're entering this into the correct format. So you're going to enter the year, the month, and then the day. And then an uppercase T for time. And then you will enter the hours, so in 24-hour time. And if you're not sure about the seconds, you can just enter 00 like I did. And then your survey end time. So for your transect, it should be the same date. Okay. So these fields that I just entered are required to be filled in. So you don't need to fill in your detector type, but I do know my detector type, so I am going to fill it in here. So this is not a required field. So again, I'm just trying to make sure that I use the right format. Great. And again, this isn't a required field, but I also know my detector serial number, so I'm going to enter that in now. And you can always enter in these fields later. You can add them in on the website once your data are uploaded, which can be a good idea in case something doesn't save or you have to reprocess the data. Then you're not having to enter it in twice. So you can just enter it into the website instead of this form if you want to. So again, this isn't required, but I do also know my microphone type. Just making sure the formatting is correct. Okay, and again, not mandatory, but I'm going to enter our microphone serial number. Just always good to have a record of that. Okay, and then again, there are a few more fields you can fill out here. None of them are mandatory. You can add them now, or you can just wait till your data are uploaded and add in the details on the website, which again, I might recommend just in case you have any issues in processing the data. The temperature and weather conditions are always really important, especially for mobile transects. So I would recommend filling those data in on the website. Okay, now this is a mandatory field. So if you use Auto ID software, you'll have to enter in your software type. So we saw my software type earlier. Okay. So again, if you don't remember how to find your software type, you're going to go to Help, About, and it lists the software type right there, 5.3.9. So when you're typing it in here, you will put 5.3.x. So the last digit will be an X. You only use 2 numbers here. So just make sure, again, that you're using the correct formatting. If you are not using Auto ID, so if you're using the free version of software, you're going to type in, instead of the Kaleidoscope version, you're going to type no Auto ID. That should work. The website should be updated to accept that option. If it doesn't, you can just type in your version of Kaleidoscope anyway, and hopefully that will work. Again, the website isn't always up to date with the most recent version of Kaleidoscope. So if you have an error with that, you can type in an older version of Kaleidoscope if you need to get your data uploaded. So then you're going to put the species list name. So the species list you created at an earlier step, you're going to type the name in there. I'm actually going to use an older list I created, not the one I created in this video. which was just an example. So I'm going to use my Atlantic Canada classifier. So make sure you remember the name of that species list. You can also check the NABAT website under your species list tab, and then the name would be over here under species list. Okay. Great, so that should be everything that you need to add to your metadata form. So now we're going to move over to the right side of the Kaleidoscope converter window. So next to create subdirectories, you can select nightly from the dropdown. This doesn't really matter for the mobile transect because you're only doing the survey over one night anyway. I'll just keep it on nightly to keep it consistent with what I do for my stationary sites, but you can also select none if you want. All of the data will be put into one folder anyway. So it's up to you if you want to select nightly or none. And then below that, you're going to make sure that you select next to WAV files to create your full spectrum files. So if you do select WAV files, you will be able to analyze the files in Kaleidoscope under both full spectrum and zero cross analysis. So we do recommend this. You can look at the files in both ways. If you select zero cross files, those files you will only be able to look at in zero cross analysis. So if you wanted zero cross only files as well, you can also select the box next to zero cross files, but that way you are duplicating the files. So you will have to make sure when you're IDing the files that you're not counting both your WAV and your zero cross files if you decide to do that. So I'm only going to select WAV files because it does let me look at the files under zero cross and full spectrum anyway. So that will be my selection. And then if you use more than one microphone to collect your data, which we sometimes do for mobile transects if we're comparing mic types, you can select the split channels option. If you only use one mic type, then you'll leave that blank. You won't select it. So down here, you can, if you would like, you can select the move noise files to noise subfolder option. So this just moves all of the files that this software, the Kaleidoscope software, will screen as noise into a separate noise subfolder. I like to do that, and then you still have to go through the noise files to manually ID them at some point, but it just helps screen the files. So you can select that, or alternatively, if you don't want the noise files to be moved to a separate folder, you can select disable noise filtering. I would not select delete noise files because Kaleidoscope can erroneously screen some of those files. So some of the noise files can actually be files with BAT passes. And if you delete them, then you'll never be able to manually ID them and check. So I wouldn't select the delete option, but if you want to disable noise filtering or you want a noise subfolder, that's your choice. So extract GPS to KML will allow the GPS file to be opened directly in Google Earth. It will allow Google Earth to be able to open that file. You can also select extract GPS disabled if you don't want to create a separate GPS file. I'm going to select extract GPS to CSV. That's just a standard that we often leave it on. And then next to this, the frequency of waypoint extraction can be specified in seconds. So 60 seconds is the standard. So I typically leave it on that. So it's up to you what you want to select here, whatever works best for you. But this is what I'm going to leave it on. Okay, so this was all under the batch tab. So now we're going to move over to the signal params tab here. Okay. So under or next to your minimum and maximum frequency range in kilohertz, you'll want to change this to ensure that the range is from 15 to 120 kilohertz. So that would cover the range for all bat species found in Atlantic Canada. So just remember that this frequency range controls the basic frequency settings in the Kaleidoscope viewer. So once you begin opening the files. So for example, if the minimum frequency of interest, if you set it here instead of 15 to 40 kilohertz, then when you use the viewer, the frequency below 40 kilohertz will be recognized, or no frequencies below 40 kilohertz will be recognized by the program. So this means that when you're looking at the files in compressed time view, you won't be able to see any bat pulses beneath 40 kilohertz. So the screen will be completely gray. So it will just screen out the files that are below 40 kilohertz. But if you do look at the entire recording in normal time view, you will still be able to see those pulses. So it's only really when you switch to the compressed time view that you will lose the ability to see those pulses below 40 kilohertz. So that just emphasizes the need to be able to look at the files in both normal time view and compressed time view. So yeah, if you're seeing gray parts of the screen in the Kaleidoscope viewer window, that just means that based on your settings, you've chosen not to see frequencies that go above or below that range. Okay, so below that, you have your minimum and maximum length of detected pulses in milliseconds. So here you're going to make sure the range is between 1 and 500. Below that, you have the maximum intersyllable gap in milliseconds. You can leave that on 500. For minimum number of pulses, you're going to specify that that is 3. That is because we require 3 pulses and 0 cross to be considered, for a file to be considered a bat pass. And if it's less than 3 pulses, we would screen that as noise. So that's why we specify 3 here. So if you are not using auto ID, you will uncheck this box here. So if you're using the free version of software, if you don't have auto ID, then you will uncheck this box here. So if the auto ID for BATS tab has a red X next to it, like these tabs do over here, then you will uncheck that box. Okay. If you are using auto ID, you're going to make sure that this box is selected because it helps with auto ID. And if you are using auto ID, we are going to go over to the auto ID for BATS tab. So if you're not using auto ID, you can fast forward and skip this section. Okay, so on the auto ID for BATS tab, first we're going to want to select from this drop down here, BATS of North America. So you'll want to select the most recent version, which I can see here right now is 5.2.1. So I'll select that version. Next to that, I keep this drop down on +1, more accurate or conservative. So that means when Kaleidoscope is performing auto ID, it is more conservative when it assigns auto ID. So when it assigns the species ID, you could also keep it on balanced or neutral. Liberal is an option as well, more sensitive, but we prefer to be more conservative with our species ID estimates. And so I would recommend keeping it on +1, more accurate or conservative. Once you do that, you need to select the same species that you had included in your species list. And you'll notice here that Kaleidoscope uses 6-letter species codes instead of 4-letter species codes. So just keep an eye on that. So you'll want to select whatever species you included in your classifier list, but I'm going to select all the species for Atlantic Canada, and you'll just check the box next to the species you want. If you accidentally select a species you don't want, just select the box again to uncheck it. So we want big brown bats, eastern red bats, hoary bats, silver-haired bats, and again, these are in alphabetical order. Then we want our myotis species, so little brown myotis, northern myotis, and we also want our tricolored bat. And you don't have the option here to include species groupings because auto ID will assign to a particular species. It does not use species groupings. Okay. So once you have all of your species selected, you can go back to the batch tab. And if you are not using Auto ID software, if you're using the free version of software, we're going to pick up here, so you follow along at this point. Okay, so now you've selected all the settings you want. You can select the Process Files button on the bottom right here. So because we have changed some of the recommended settings, it's going to ask you, are you sure? And you can click on OK if you're sure that you selected the right settings, the settings that we just went through. So once you click on OK, it's going to process your files. And then it's also going to open the first file in that process file folder for you. If you have the Auto ID version of software, it will also open your results table. So let's look at the files that were created. So we're going to go to our NABAT folder for this year. Now the data has been processed, so process data. We're going to go to our mobile Transect folder and select the date that we just processed the files for. Okay. And these are the files that are created. So you can see here that I wanted the files split up by recording night. So I have a folder here with the recording night, the date listed. Okay, so the files are within there. And I also specified that I wanted a noise subfolder created if there were any noise files. So you can see most of the files recorded during a mobile transect. Kaleidoscope is screened as noise, which is normal because you do create extra noise when you are driving, unfortunately. But so you can see those folders there. If we go back to our main Transect folder, you can see that there are some other files that have been created for us. So you have a log.txt file. This file keeps a record of each step of the file processing and can be used for diagnostics if an error occurs. You have your settings.ini file as well. This file keeps a record of the settings used in the Kaleidoscope converter window during data processing. So you can reload these settings in the Kaleidoscope converter window if you want to. So if you've closed everything and you want maybe to reprocess your files, or you want to use the exact same settings to process maybe your other mobile Transect files, if you open the Kaleidoscope converter window and you go to File, Load Settings, and then go back to that file folder that you just created. So we want our NABAT folder for this year, processed, mobile, July 10th. If you select that settings.ini file and open, then the settings that you had used to process those files will all open again in the Kaleidoscope converter window. So that can be useful. You also have a GPS.csv, and that is because I specified in the dropdown that I wanted the GPS file to be a CSV, but if you specified KML, then it would be a KML file. If you decided not to create a different or create an additional GPS file, then that won't be there. You also have your meta.csv file here. This file contains all of the metadata that you entered into the NABAT metadata form in the Kaleidoscope converter window. It also will provide a list of all the files recorded within this mobile transect. And this is the spreadsheet where the manual ID for each file will be added. So the manual IDs here will be added if you are using the free version of software. So you can see here everything we entered in the metadata form will be in this file, our start time, our end time, our detector type. Our files are here. Okay, and your manual ID should populate here if you're using the free version of software. And you can see how to do that in another video. Okay. And we do our latitude and longitude automatically populated here because we did use a GPS during our survey. But if you did not, those columns should be empty. Okay. So you will have all of those files if you're using the free version of software. If you are using the paid for version of software with AutoID, you will have some additional files, which you can see here because I do have the paid for version of software. So you will have an id.csv. So this file will provide a list of all the files recorded during the mobile transect, and it also will include averages of call parameter values for each file in addition to the auto ID given for the file. So if you are manually IDing the files with the pro version of software, this is where the manual ID for each file will be populated. So you can see here, you can see the auto IDs for the files are in this column here. Again, most of them are noise. These are your call parameters that the software used to auto ID those files. And when you enter your manual ID, which again, you can watch how to do that in another video, this manual ID column will populate here instead of the meta.csv. You will also have an ID summary.csv file created if you have the paid for version of software. And this just gives a summary of all the files recorded for each species during that survey. So that can be useful as well. So after you have done that, if you have done other mobile transects in that grid cell, you will go back and follow those same steps for each survey that you conducted. If you haven't conducted any other mobile transects, then you are done processing your mobile transect data. So after all the mobile transect data have been processed, the next task will be to manually identify the files, which you can watch in a different video. Okay, I hope that was helpful.